Let's go. We back at it, everybody. And hello. Let me tell you, it's been an interesting day. Davos, World Economic Forum, everything's popping off, and we're seeing some comments, some quotes. We're going to talk about everything, and we're going to be succinct. I got to be honest right out the gate. The big anticipation, the solution for the affordability crisis was a big donut so far. I've been watching Davos and the World Economic Forum pretty much all day long, trying to get my my bearings around what is and is not going to be sensational. And I got to be honest, the most sensational thing that I've seen today so far has been the update on the drama with Taylor Swift, Justin Baldoni, and Blake Lively. The World Economic Forum has not been that sexy, but there have been some quotes we are going to pull down and pull out of that. And we're going to share with you today on the live. But first, let's check all the good things. You know, this show is about analytics, not just about opinions. So we're going to look straight at the data. Let's take a look at the status of the market. As of right now, you're looking at a tech-led narrow rally. This recovering from yesterday's drop-off in the markets. If you saw a bunch of red yesterday, we're going to explain why coming up a little bit later on in the show. It had a lot to do with what's going on with Japan and their bond market. Something I have been worried about for a prolonged period of time in this country happening here. I do think it might be a bellwether for what could and likely may happen. But let's check the market here. So again, narrow rally. It is a tech-led rally. It is a Dow Industrials are up, S&P's up. Pretty much everybody is up right now, which is a good thing. You're seeing, I think, a good, healthy response to a lot of the stuff you saw in the market. And it did help that the president said he was not going to use force to attack, take Greenland, if you will. So I don't know how that all plays out, but certainly it seems to be a very diplomatic solution, which took a little bit of the tension out of the markets. And I think that you're seeing this here with the market rebounding back a little bit on the heels of what was Japan's Treasury drop-off. There is a bit of a debate. We'll get into Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's commentary as it relates to how much of this was based on Greenland versus this incident in Japan, which we're going to get into. So I think there's a little bit of that there. But for today, we're in a pretty healthy recovery market. Things seem to be bouncing back a little bit. The synthetic volatility index is calm. This, if you don't recall, is our parallel to the VIX. The VIX is creeping up a little bit closer to 20, which we've always used as kind of our barometer for more fear in the economy. Today, you're seeing a calm market. This is about 5 points lower on this index than we had been just this time last week. So you're seeing a little bit more, I guess, fear in the markets, and particularly around the intraday range stress. This number here is what's really dragging this number down below 90. And to me, that tells me that you're seeing some responses to the things that are happening in Davos in real time. And because of that, you're seeing increased fear in the markets versus what you saw in the previous weeks. So that intraday range stress up and down, again, that's not uncommon coming on the heels of a recovery. So we saw the Japanese bond market take a dive yesterday, perhaps some Greenland fears in there of what the president was going to talk about at Davos this morning at 5 a.m. Pacific time. And because none of those things materially happened, I think what we wound up getting is a set of circumstances where the market's rebounding, but you're showing lows and highs, which is really that intraday stress period. And yes, my friends in the chat, it is going to be a good one. Sean, what up? Welcome, buddy. Let's go to the widescreen for a second here. And let's say hello to everybody. There we go. I did get this working again. I found out what the issue was. This will be a good one. I promise if you stay with us, we're going to have some quotes from Jamie Dimon. We're going to have some quotes from Scott Bessent. We're going to play the live video. We're going to have some stuff from obviously the president and his responses. And then we're going to talk about how all of the stuff that we thought was going to happen did not actually happen and it was misrepresented. I would be remiss if I did not say what up to my guy, Sean. How you doing, brother? Let's see who else we got in here. It's called confusion. There you go. It is called confusion. And I think that there's going to be a lot of confusion as it relates to what we're seeing in the market and some of the stuff that we're seeing in real time. So let's spend some time on a little bit more of the status of the market, because this is all going to set us up well for the conversation about housing in Davos. So let's go over to our other chart that you know that we built here. This is the liquidity pulse index telling us effectively what the Fed has as far as liquidity. Are we risk on? Are we risk off? If we have a flood of liquidity, we're risk on. If we have a draining of liquidity in the markets, we are risk off. And for those of you who want, as a reminder, the mechanism here is simple. The Fed balance sheet minus the Fed reverse repo and the Treasury account gives you your net liquidity level. And we are actually drawing liquidity out of the system here as a result of those things. And this is a great time to show one of the classic misunderstandings of the market. Yeah, the Fed balance sheet can look like it's flooding the market with cash. And that's what you're going to hear. That's the headline on CNBC. The problem is when you do the math from a perspective of a banker's view, you realize that the reverse repo line is being drawn on pretty heavily, right? So it's a bit of a restrictive Fed repo line. And remember, the Fed came out and said they were going to start funneling more money into that, encouraging the borrowing on that, and banks were going to borrow more because of tax season coming up and because of the end of the year and people just needed more liquidity. Well, that seems to actually have drawn out more than it's given to the market at this point in time. The Treasury account seems to be somewhat supportive of extra liquidity in the market, which is what the Fed is actively doing. But your net liquidity level is still draining out of the system, not actually dumping money in. So we are not risk on. We are not draining risk off. We're right there in the middle. We're tense. That's what this header is up here. We're at a nice tense level for liquidity in the economy, which if you look at the market from the perspective of the risk perspective, which we talked about earlier, this one here, and you go, okay, we're increasing risk incrementally, but we're still in a very normal, calm period of time. You've got the status of the markets in a very narrow tech-led rally. This is really telling you with this chart here, the liquidity pulse index, that the Fed is still going to wait and see before acting. And for those of you who remember and watch the show frequently, episode 318 is out and streaming as of yesterday. Hope you guys enjoyed the break. The most interesting thing to take home here is today's commentary, this week's commentary about the president's ability to fire Lisa Cook is meaningful for no other reason, simply from the fact that if he can get rid of Lisa Cook, then he will be able to name 4 acting voting Fed presidents to the FOMC, which would give him the majority of vote in the way that he, in theory, would want the president. So it does sway the future of what the candor of that conversation will be from the Fed in the future. And I think the Fed is in this poised, prime position to kind of wait and see. If you have Jerome Powell's commentary, I think waiting and seeing is probably the most intelligent thing to do. The president obviously thinks that you need to cut rates. And we have, of course, another chart for you guys to take a look at, the home affordability index, which really targets this. And for you guys that watched the previous lives, this is the one that changed my mind a little bit on how meaningful rates were to the market versus just home prices. I've always been a pundit saying that home prices were too high. I still think that's the case. But I think that the most meaningful thing that you're seeing here is mortgage rate pressure. We're seeing a locked out mortgage interest rate pressure, and this just got worse. The 10-year yesterday rose here in the US, and we're going to talk about why and how and the mechanisms of what this works, how this works, and what it looks like in the economy towards the end of this 1 hour long live episode. And we're going to explain how this situation here is going to get a whole lot worse in the not too distant future unless something meaningfully, I guess, dynamic changes the system. That being said, the rest of the market is, again, still strained. You got mortgage payment burden is strained. You got the mortgage rate pressure locked out. You got price to income ratio strained. And you got income momentum strained, meaning you're not seeing wage growth keeping up with this. This all from the Federal Reserve's data from Fed. We're using the St. Louis Fed in this particular case. And again, supply, one of the most misunderstood narratives in the market, and this is important to what we're going to talk about in Davos. You have the president who came out and said that he was going to do a couple things. He beta tested, if you will, the markets. He came out and said that we're going to look at 50-year mortgages. That was widely panned with negative commentary in the markets. He said, oh, you know what? We're going to look at banning institutional investors. We're going to talk about it in Davos. We're going to roll out a plan. I have yet to see a meaningful plan, but there have been some things that have rolled out in Davos that you should know. And he said that he was going to do some other things around housing, which included cutting rates and stuff like that. And then credit cards, banning, limiting credit card limits and stuff like that there. It was also said and done, but how that'll actually work, I don't know. So let's go step by step because the supply is not constrained at this particular time across the country on average. There is a supply and demand issue that's still, got a tug of war going on. But the biggest issue here, comparing them all at a fair basis, is still mortgage rate pressure. Mortgage rate pressure is going to be a problem. And I'm not advocating that mortgage rates need to come down to solve this problem. You just lived through 14 years of artificial interest rate deflation. Of the 60% of homes that have a mortgage in this country, the majority of them, over 60%, have mortgage rates below 5%. So until you get mortgage rates down there, you still have this locked out effect. So that's why we describe this as locked out as the mortgage rate pressure, not necessarily that mortgage rates are too high, although them coming down does have a more meaningful impact than the same type of relative adjustments on home values. I think you need a combination of both to solve this, but neither here nor there. So let's talk for a moment about Davos, okay? There's been a lot of really important speakers there, and we're going to look at every single one of them, and we're going to listen to a lot of those comments now here, and I'm going to actually tune up a little bit and get ready for the audio side here. So there was lots of comments around AI, lots of comments from Ray Dalio about the current status of the market. Cryptocurrency played a big role in the conversation. Obviously, Greenland and the president played a big role. But the chippy commentary between Jamie Dimon and the president continues to go on in rhetoric, and you're seeing more and more of that in the last couple of days. And then towards the end of the Davos commentary, I do want to take a brief, call it 10, 15-minute transition into an article by Resi Club. I think that's Lambert over there, Lance Lambert, where he talks about the build to rent. It was exempt from the White House's order banning institutional home buying, which if you're a home builder and you build to rent as your purpose, and that's now exempt because you're providing housing supply in the form of rental properties, which would have been a problem with banning institutional investors from owning property. I don't know how meaningful this is other than you got a good headline out of it, if it makes any sense. But let's jump in to some of the stuff here. I'm sharing a lot of content from X today. That's where I got a lot of real-time feedback on some of this stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this in a couple different variants. Let's start off with the most obvious one in a full screen variant here. Let me switch to the screen. There you go. This is in Davos. I think this one speaks for itself, so I'm not going to prep you a whole lot, but let's play it, listen in, and see how it goes.
So, first of all, it's a pleasure to be on the gloom and doom panel.
Yeah,
We're not
doom. You know that.
1920s were an extraordinary period. As I said at the beginning, it's not preordained that it has to end badly.
The end note of the 1920s, which was, of course, the Great Depression, Andrew. So let's take a step back and talk about where we are right here, right now. The area of recklessness is the is the spending of governments around the world, who are all, with little exception, all spending well beyond their means. That's the recklessness of this moment in history. This is not a parallel to the 1920s in terms of the recklessness of the private capital markets. It's a story of the recklessness of government spending. Within the private sector, there's a huge question as to where AI will take us. And I was carefully taking notes and listening to what Larry has to say, or to what Madame Lagarde has to say, because this is one of the big issues of our moment. Will AI create the productivity acceleration that is honestly that is hoped for in Washington and in the halls of government around the world as a way to overcome the profligate spending that we're currently engaged in? Like, the world needs a savior. And the hope is that AI is the savior that we need for productivity. And the challenge with this is it may or may not be. We just don't know yet. Now, there's a tremendous amount of hype around AI. And in some sense,
we just don't know yet. This is going to be a resounding theme through all of the conversations we listened to today. And I'm only going to bring you the meaningful parts. For those of you who did not hear Matt Damon's commentary on this and Ben Affleck's commentary on this, Ben Affleck more than Matt, I think it's worth sharing. We're probably going to share that on the show a little bit here because I think it talks a great deal to, I think, a very good explanation of AI and its value here. But you're going to hear some of these heads of world economic finance and geopolitics talk about it in much the same way. And it's going to be very interesting to see that perhaps the landscape around this narrative is changing. Let's let him finish up real quick.
The large AI companies need to create that hype to raise the tens or actually hundreds of billions of dollars of investment that are going into the field. Like, you wouldn't be able to raise hundreds of billions of dollars. We'll spend, and Larry can probably correct me on this, but roughly $600 billion this year in CapEx for data centers in the United States.
I think it to be larger.
But does that mean that it's getting hyped up too much, or it's just the hype is required as a sales mechanism?
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. Is that the sales mechanism, or is it totally valuable and valid, and is that a stance that should be taken in order to get the level of investment that needs to be done and needs to be made in order to get people to where they need to be? Let me see if I can find real quick, and I actually have not searched for it, but there we go. I think I can find this. He was on Joe Rogan, and he made, is he at the, okay, no, he's not there. Yeah, here it is. And this is actually a really, really good statement by Ben Affleck on AI, and it caught me a little bit by surprise because I didn't see him as this guy, but his grasp of this, if you haven't watched, has been really, really strong. And I think he articulated it in a way that we can all relate to. So let's jump into that.
What I see is, like, for example, if you try to get ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini to write you something, it's really shitty. And it's shitty because by its nature, it goes to the mean, to the average. And it's not reliable. And I just can't even stand to see what it writes. Now, it's a useful tool if you're a writer and you're going, what's the thing? I'm trying to set something up, or somebody sends someone a letter, but it's delayed 2 days and it can give you some examples of that. I actually don't think it's very likely that it's going to be able to write anything meaningful, and in particular, that it's going to be making movies like from whole cloth, like Tilly Norwood. Like, that's bullshit. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's not. I think it turns out the technology is not progressing in exactly the same way they sort of presented it.
Okay, now this next part is really important for the rest of the stance on AI, and I think everyone should have at least a little bit of this perspective as they go into the next year on AI growth. So pay attention to this part. Perk up.
And really what it is going to be a tool. Just like sort of visual effects, and yeah, it needs to have language around it. You need to protect your name and likeness. You can do that. You can watermark it. Those laws already exist. I can't sell your fucking picture for money. I can't. You can sue me, period. It kind of feels to me like the thing we were talking about earlier, where there's a lot more fear because we have this existential dread. It's going to wipe everything out.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But that actually runs counter, in my view, to what history seems to show, which is adoption is slow, it's incremental. I think a lot of that rhetoric comes from people who are trying to justify valuations around companies where they go, we're going to change everything. In 2 years, there's going to be no more work. Well, the reason they're saying.
And that's Andrew Ross Sorkin's point when he, on that panel at Davos, said, is it salesmanship or is it actually needed? And let him continue on a little bit here, but I think you're going to see that this is a common thread with some speakers. AI up into this point historically has been one of those things you have to mention. And you'll hear Jamie Dimon in future commentary that I provide here say, you got to live with the world you got. We all want to have a world that's different, but you got to live with the world that we're in right now because that's the only real set of circumstances. Everything else is aspirational. You play the hand that's dealt, and right now the world has got a hand that's been dealt, and we've got to play it that way. So again, let's go back here to let him finish this, and I promise I won't interrupt anymore, but I'm trying to really thread a needle here very tightly.
That is because they need to ascribe a valuation for investment that can warrant the CapEx spend they're going to make on these data centers with the argument that like, oh, as soon as we do the next model, it's going to scale up and be 3 times as good, except that actually ChatGPT-5 about 25% better than ChatGPT-4 and costs about 4 times as much in the way of electricity and data. So those, when they say that's like plateauing, the early AI, the line went up very steeply, and it's now sort of leveling off. I think it's because, and yes, it'll get better, but it's going to be really expensive to get better. And a lot of people were like, fuck this, we want ChatGPT-4, because it turned out like the vast majority of people who use AI are using it to as companion bots to chat with at night. And so there's no work, there's no productivity, there's no value to it. I would argue there's also not a lot of social value to getting people to focus on an AI friend who's, telling you that you're great and listening to everything you say and being sycophantic. But that's sort of a side issue. I think for this particular purpose, the way I see the technology and what it's good at and what it's not, it's going to be good at filling in all the places that are expensive and burdensome and they make it harder to do it. And it's always going to rely fundamentally on the human artistic aspects of it.
Yeah, I think that's 100% accurate. And I think that there are some things that you're going to get AI to do. And I'm a heavy user of AI. I think that's worthwhile to share. And I think that my experience has been, if you take things step by step and you prompt AI the right way and you know which AI is better at what task, you can get a good result. Does that mean that I can be more efficient? 100%. Does that mean that I can unilaterally trust what AI is doing at this particular juncture in time? No. And do I find that it struggles more? So I've been designing a lot of the overlays that you've seen on the show. And one of the things that I've been dealing with is that I keep trying to talk to AI from an aesthetics perspective, right? And that's not the way this works. The way this works is that AI, if you prompt it based on a singular function, will respond generally pretty well to you. But if you ask it to look at a picture and reference it, there are models that are better at doing that to get the result that you want. But with a general rule, you're going to get better responses from AI if you prompt it well with English and grammar and you tell it what you want versus saying, hey, I want it to look like this. Now, it is getting better in that regard as it relates to pictures and video, and we've certainly seen things like Higgsfield AI and some of the stuff that we saw with Sora coming out now, and AI can do some really, really cool things. But there is a lacking creativity element that we haven't gotten to yet. And whenever we get there, and I'm sure that we will, that is going to require an unbelievable amount of compute, which means an unbelievable amount of power, which is what he is referencing here, where you're seeing the plateau of the technology relative to the power usage have an inverse relationship, where you're seeing the plateauing of the technology a little bit as power demand is spiking a little bit the way the AI spiked in the very beginning of the initial users. So there is a difference there, and some of the people in Davos that are speaking picked up on that and know that. And some of the people in Davos did not. And I think that's going to be an interesting conversation. Just side note, anecdotally, you didn't hear a whole lot about global warming and the environment in this particular variant of things. Let's switch a little bit to Ray Dalio, one of my favorites. If you've watched the show, you know I am a big Ray Dalio fan. I read Principles, His book, I should say, read loosely. I listened to Ray Dalio's Principles. It's a very, very long book. This is Ray Dalio outside talking about the world order. And this is going to become another conversation that we're going to kind of intertwine here a little bit, because I think it's important to note that world order and the way we look at things from a global perspective are going to be more important now, great face here, than ever before, because of the intertwining of all of our currencies, and particularly if we go off the traditional financial system into the blockchain, this is what we're going to get. So let's listen to him talk.
Let's step back from the sensational and be clear about what I mean. The monetary order is breaking down. Okay. What I mean by the monetary order is that fiat currencies and debt as a storehold of wealth is not being held by central banks in the same way, and that there was a change. The biggest market to move last year was the gold market, far better than the tech markets, right, and so on. And the U.S. markets underperformed foreign markets because of the fact you could see it in the numbers of the central banks and so on. So let's just look at the fact that on the other side of trade deficits and trade wars, there are capital and capital wars. And so as we're looking at that, and you reported what the stock market and so on, but you didn't report that the gold market is also up 3.
We did say that earlier this morning.
Okay.
It's up to
But
record
I'm
levels
saying,
again, and silver.
Is you look at what is happening and why it's happening and who's buying it. So let's just take a moment on that capital war issue, okay? We know that both the holders of U.S. dollar denominated debt, which is money, and those who need it, the United States, are worried about each other, right? So if you have other countries who are holding it and they're worried about each other, and we're producing a lot of it, that's a big issue, right? So you have to explain what is going on with fiat currencies, generally speaking. And now if you take the conflicts, you can't ignore the possibility that capital wars, in other words, maybe there's not the same inclination to buy U.S. debt and so on. We at least need to talk about those possibilities and find out who is buying and selling what that is behind these market movements.
And what?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting spin, and you're seeing a very different narrative around cryptocurrency. This entire World Economic Event, you're seeing a very different perspective, a very different language, and you're seeing people talk about gold being weaponized and used against fiat currency. And I think that so the rhetoric here, actually, this is going to be worthwhile, and I think this is probably funny to share. And I say funny because I think it's an anecdotal reference. The value in this show is that we talk about things while including the social narrative. We include your comments. We include people who watch. And there are a lot of people who watch on different platforms that I can't bring into the comments, and I apologize. The APIs aren't there. This is a good perspective. So here you go. Sober up. Central banks will never buy digital shitcoins. Bitcoin is a product of fiat. It will go down as well. Central banks still control liquidity despite challenges. Bitcoin's role remains speculative in systematic shifts. Bitcoin is going to thrive in chaos now. Bitcoin is actually dumb. Why? Not quantum resistant, security, budget diminishing, payment rails that's been crippled against the wishes of Satoshi Nakamoto. There is, and I'm only reading these comments in order as right below the same video we just watched, to show you there is still a pretty wide divide on cryptocurrency adoption. And all of this while gold is hitting all-time highs. And all of this while you're seeing a pretty interesting change in the landscape of how, of how we're seeing things happen. So he goes on, I believe, on this one. Let me make sure I got the right video. I don't want to hit the same one twice, I think. No, that's not the same one. Okay, good. See, I'm glad I didn't click on that because that would have been the exact same one. So you'll see there's a video that we have here at some point in time, and I'll try to pull it up, where you also get Ray Dalio saying that he thinks that 15% of your portfolio should be in gold. Because traditionally speaking, whether you like cryptocurrency or not as a third party involving, right, you've got in his mind you've got equities, you've got gold, and you've got now crypto. I'm just going to put BTC here, and not that I've got a bias. He's saying historically, you've seen equities go down, you've seen gold go up, and while Bitcoin is now a player in this space, everybody should have about 15% there in gold. And if you're buying into a little bit of our methodology here that we've talked about historically under a new world order investment strategy as opposed to a 60-40 split between equities and bonds, and we're going to talk a little bit about the bond market and why that this may or may not be helpful for you. You could go QQQ, right, 60%. You could go to Bitcoin, 40%, and that new world order variant. But what he's basically saying is that this and gold tend to interact. So you could, in theory, say 55% QQQ. You could say 35% of crypto or Bitcoin in this case, and then you could say maybe 10% in gold, right? And that would be your hedge, inflationary, I guess, strategy, although there is no true hedge against inflation other than to continue buying through inflation, if that makes sense. So let's get to some of the president's comments. I think that some of these are going to be important for what we've set up now. So now we've got, just to be clear, you've got New World Order, you've got a changing landscape around crypto, you've got AI being spoken about, and now you got the president who's going to come down and talk about housing in Greenland. So we're going to move to that too. These are all the major headlines from this particular event, headlines that I think are important to share. And they all tie together at the very end of this because you're going to see how the markets move. This is a very short one. It's only 23 seconds. So full disclosure, I promise I won't interrupt that much on this one, I guess. So let's get the audio right here and play it for you guys.
Stock market took the first dip yesterday because of Iceland. So Iceland's already cost us a lot of money. But that dip is peanuts compared to what it's gone up. And we have an unbelievable future in that stock. That stock market is going to be doubled. We're going to hit 50,000, and that stock market's going to double in a relatively short period of time.
So what he's talking about is yesterday we saw a pretty big sell-off in the stock market yesterday, which rallied and recovered today. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that because there is going to be some parallels to the rest of Davos and what we saw happen in Japan in the bond market. So I will cover that in the last, call it 10 or 15 minutes. We got about 10 more minutes to go of covering Davos and some of the commentary that I've made before we piece it all together. And I do want to spend the majority of the remainder of the show on housing and affordability and what did not happen. You may recall the president did come out and say that he was going to be unveiling this, big strategy and that a lot of things were going to change and affordability was going to be addressed in Davos. And I don't think that we saw that. And I certainly don't think that we did see amounted to that. So let's get into some more from this particular, and I'm going to go ahead and close this bad boy up and drag this over here. Let's get into a little bit more of this. I'm going to back this up and we'll play this one also short, but I think it is worthwhile to give you some perspective. This also from his commentary in Davos this morning at 5 a.m.
To unleash innovation and savings and financing a more
Sorry about that.
To ensure America remains the crypto capital of the world. And to that end, last year I signed the landmark Genius Act into law. Now Congress is working very hard on crypto market structure legislation, Bitcoin, all of them, which I hope to sign very soon, unlocking new pathways for Americans to reach financial freedom.
Yeah. So again, the whole entire rhetoric around crypto has meaningfully changed. Just a couple years ago, everybody was, crypto's a devil. No. And we had a crypto winter not too long ago. So I think there's been a meaningful and palpable change in how the world economy feels about cryptocurrency and about their backing of it now, all while AI is particularly lifting up. And that is, if you've been following the show, that is why, I apologize, let's not look at the stocks just yet. That is why on this particular slide with the US market risk profile, you're seeing a tech-led section here. Historically, over the course of the last couple of decades, you've seen tech be the leading market or sector to really drag the economy from one run to another. And it has been very, very palpable if you look at the Mag 7, that 7 stocks can carry the S&P. So that is why we added tech here as an anecdotal commentary, because normally you would say, okay, if the market is growing, you have liquidation, risk off, defensive, growth run, broad rally, risk on. And I actually removed risk on from this perspective because cryptocurrency and AI, whether you like it or not, are here to stay. Now, in what form, what way, shape, or form, we don't know. And I know that somewhere Saeed's listening to this and he's really upset because his wet paper towel hands around crypto have hurt him a whole great deal. But the fact of the matter is, these things are not going to go away. And yeah, cryptocurrency may or may not have more or less value. Devaluation of currency is a very normal pattern in human history, whether that's gold, whether that's cash, fiat, or that's cryptocurrency. That's going to happen. You're going to see the ups and downs. That's why there's a market for it. That's what supply and demand and trade are there. So I'm not going to demonize things for losing value. But the inherent intertwined nature of cryptocurrency and AI is something that you cannot ignore, which is why our show leads in part with that. What up, Saeed? In the chat, my guy. I just accused you of having wet paper towel hands once again. And you know what? I don't regret it at all. So, yeah, he's there. Let's actually go to the chat for a little bit. I haven't spent any time talking to anybody today. I know that chat is kind of quiet on the YouTube side, but on the Instagram side, yes, I'm interested in what they plan to do about institutional investors. We're going to cover that here in just actually next. So stay with me for a couple minutes. Everything is transitioning to the blockchain, even NYSE. Yes, it is. I also think that we're going to see a world where blockchain is used for things like real estate and title. That is in my case. Let me just make a broad statement, okay? And not everybody's going to understand this, but that's fine. Every single receipt you get from shopping anywhere should be on the blockchain. We never lose receipts again. We know chain of record and title and ownership. You ever want to resell something, you now have it on the blockchain. Your receipt is there, and the subsequent owner, in turn, will have your receipt on vis-a-vis the blockchain's ownership of that and that notification period. That, to me, has always been the biggest strength of Web3 and the blockchain and cryptocurrency, frankly, is the public level of disclosure and knowledge. I think a lot of people don't like that because they want this hidden privacy, agenda thing. But our title records for real estate are all in the United States, at least anyway, public record anyway. So why do we have a public title record, which goes up and down the chain of title in this old school race notice jurisdictional nonsense, when that's outdated now? Technology, the blockchain has completely eviscerated the need for that. And why title companies still do things that way is beyond me. There's things like encroachment and real estate benefits and all those things that you learn in law school, which I unfortunately did attend, that will help you understand those things. But the fact of the matter is, you don't need it anymore, which is why, again, adoption here is going to be continuing over time, and it's not going away. So let's jump into the housing and affordability. Trump did a lot of talking. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Greenland, and then we'll get right into the affordability here, and we'll jump into some of that. Let's see here. No, not that one. I want to jump into Greenland next. I think Greenland's probably the most valuable one to talk about because this is interesting, and it did move the markets in a heavy way today. So people were afraid that we were going to go to war and take Greenland, which is not the case. And the president made that very clear in his commentary here. And I think that made a lot of people in the markets happy, which is partially why you saw a green run today and the market picking back up.
In 2019, Denmark said that they would spend over $200 million to strengthen Greenland's defenses. But as you know, they spent less than 1% of that amount. 1%, there's no sign of Denmark there. And I say that with great respect for Denmark, whose people I love, whose leaders are very good.
Probably helps
it's
like you guys see it.
the United States alone that can protect this giant mass of land, this giant piece of ice, develop it and improve it and make it so that it's good for Europe and safe for Europe and good for us. And that's the reason I'm seeking immediate negotiations to once again discuss the acquisition of Greenland by the United States, just as we have acquired many other territories throughout our history.
Okay, there you go. So, and this goes on, and I don't think there's a whole lot of value in going on in that, and I apologize for not giving you the full view in the very beginning there. So yeah, you've got a pretty interesting and seismic shift in the commentary in Davos. It has largely been, at least from my perspective here, it has largely been uneventful, and we've seen some commentary, and we're going to get into Jamie Dimon here, and then I think the housing is probably a better transition because Jamie Dimon is pushing back on a lot of things that I think are meaningful. Jamie Dimon's commentary was more about the caps on credit card limits, and for those of you who follow Jamie Dimon and are fans like I am, I think that some of his comments are really important, and they will explain a little bit about why there is some pushback on some of the president's ideals, but more importantly, he talks a lot about how he disagrees with some of those policies that are going to impact you and I. Most notably, in this particular video, we have tariffs. Tariffs are not something that's universally agreed upon, but let's hear his thoughts.
There are three parts to trade.
Uh-oh. That's happened a while. Like, I have the craziest fast internet speed too. Huh. Let's try that again. Maybe this is a refresh thing. Weird. Okay, let's try that again.
Some require tariffs. Okay, one part is national security. We should do what we have to do to create national security around rare earths, around advanced active pharmaceutical ingredients, and some that may require policy that is not typical, like tariffs or pay, long-term dated contracts, so you can build the stuff here you need, and some advanced manufacturing category. These companies cannot succeed if there aren't barriers, quotas, tariffs, or pay for play. Absolutely a sine qua non. I would do what I had to do to protect American national security. The second one is unfair trade. And there's, I say unfair, important trade. I just don't think furniture or T-shirts are important trade. But, there is unfair trade. It's in some places blown out of proportion. But, if you are subsidizing China in this case, or anyone, subsidizing their cars, their batteries, their this, that, so anyone who tries to compete is going to get sunk because of subsidies. And the subsidies can come in various forms, then you should counter that. You can counter that with quotas. A lot of countries have quotas. You can counter that with tariffs, perfectly fine, as long as there's a reason for it. But I'm not a tariff guy in general. I don't think in general it's a great idea, but it is what it is. And so.
But the president is a tariff guy in general.
He is.
He loves tariffs.
He is.
So this is an area where you would disagree.
I would.
Okay.
So one of the things you're gonna see more and more from Jamie Dimon as of late, and I don't know what exactly is why he's breaking rank from his typical very democratic, neutral position, but you're seeing a new dude, a dude who literally is free and willing to say things that he normally would not have said historically, and it's tripping me out, frankly. It's a different kind of commentary from him in a way that I'm not used to seeing. I don't think the world's used to seeing. But if you don't get a chance to watch a lot of Davos, and I get it, it's not for everybody's cup of tea. Watch this interview, and I'm going to play 2 more minutes from it as it relates to credit cards. But he is very open about some of his thoughts and criticisms, not only of the president and government, which he normally has not done, but he's also very critical of a lot of the policy stuff that he's seeing internationally. So I hope this video doesn't stall either, because it's been a really good one, and it's one of my favorites.
Recent proposals that would.
Dude, what is going on with X these days, bro? Let's give it a second to load while it's doing that. Maybe it's a loading thing. So she is actually pulling no punches, and she is actively trying to get a soundbite from him, something that he commented on at some points during this particular interview, where he's like, look, I'm not going to give you the soundbite. I know what you're looking for. And she was. But at the same time, it's an excellent interview because it was also a little contentious in the right ways to prod him to be the person that he's becoming, and this very vocal person. So I think that has a lot to do with it. Come on, man. What are you doing to me over here? Let's play. Maybe if I do what I did last time and refresh it. I think this is an X thing. I think
one of President Trump's recent proposals that would
come on.
affect you. He's doing it to improve affordability, is to impose a 10% cap on credit card rates. Is that a bad idea?
It would be an economic disaster. And I'm not making up because our business, we would survive it, by the way. You would, if you, in the worst case, you'd have to have a drastic reduction of the credit card business. I mean drastic. I mean like 10%. I mean like 80%. It would remove credit from 80% of Americans, and that is their backup credit. But I have a great idea. Since there's a huge disagreement on this one, between Republicans and Democrats.
So this is what I like to call sassy Jamie Dimon. Okay, so he's going to come out now and he's going to make a comment. And if you're not familiar with politics, he's basically pointing to political locations, saying, try it there, where these people will be the most impacted from a constituent standpoint, and let me know how that goes. But he's clearly taking a political shot across the bow here.
I think we should test it. And my view, and I can't do this, because it'd be antitrust, but the government can do it. They should force all the banks to do it in 2 states, Vermont and Massachusetts, and see what happens. And then I think the left will learn everyone who thinks manipulating price will learn a real lesson. And the people crying the most won't be the credit card companies. It'll be the restaurants, the retailers, the travel companies, the schools, the municipalities, because people will miss their water payments, their this payment and that payment. It would be something else to watch. I think they should test it.
So that is a very self-serving narrative, however. And as much as I like Jamie Dimon, he's basically suggesting, without saying it, and it is very narrowly tailored in his language here, he's basically alluding to the idea that people would not have the same extensions of credit because the banks would not be paid for the commiserate risk because they're not able to charge over 10%. And as a result of them not providing so much credit and the limits that they would have to impose, that these individuals would no longer be able to pay things. Basically, number one, suggesting that they would cut back the amount of credit available to the American public because they couldn't charge more than 10%, which is a little nuts. And two, that because of this, most Americans are living, in fact, off credit right now as opposed to living on free cash flow, which in and of itself is an entirely massive problem with a lack of wage growth that he is alluding to, maybe inadvertently here, but suggesting that this would cause problems. Now, I agree. It will cause massive problems to the American people for all of those reasons. But note how he criticizes the president in this particular instance and does not admit that there are ramifications that are self-imposed by how they would respond to the situation, they being the banks, not necessarily JP Morgan Chase. And he led off with, of course, the most democratic political thing you could say, we would survive it, but let me tell you why this fails for everybody. So he's got another minute here, I think, to carry on here.
Well, President Trump may be determined to test it more broadly.
Well, then, okay, whatever it is, we'll deal with it. I think it's wrong for the government to get involved extensively in pricing of stuff, but I got to deal with the world I got.
It's kind of interesting.
We're going to give them, at one point, real analysis on the effects of this. We've given some, but not a lot.
It's kind of interesting. When I ask you something that directly affects JP Morgan, you say it will be a complete economic disaster. Yeah. When I speak more broadly about geopolitics, you're very reluctant to criticize the president.
See, that's exactly right. So this is why I said she prodded him in just the right amount. Number one, if it affects directly JP Morgan, like you're very open and quick to criticize the president. You just said that the White House should not be involved in pricing. But at the same time, you turn around and you support him on geopolitical levels that are not necessarily focused on JP Morgan. And you have to understand, Jamie Dimon has his own constituents. His own constituents are not the American people as much as he is the largest bank in the world. His constituents are the shareholders, both institutional and retail investors, into JP Morgan Chase. He has a fiduciary obligation as their CEO to protect their interests. So he's going to vocally defend them every time this opportunity arises. And he did say something that he says routinely and has become almost his new mantra. I got to live in the world I got, which is his way of saying you can't fight the set of circumstances you're dealt. You can only react to them. Everybody has some level of trauma. You have to choose how you're going to live in that world with your trauma, the world you got. And in this case, his trauma is the White House trying to impact his profits vis-a-vis credit card spending. And she prodded him in the most elegant way. Good for her.
I know exactly. The other one is more qualitative, how it's going to work, what are the pieces, what's their intent, how are people going to respond. They're not the same thing. But the economic, when you believe something to be true, you should say that. And so the economic of the card thing, we'll see.
Do you think CEOs...
But the other thing, I've not seen anyone, really, Republicans, senators, businesses, banks, credit unions, community banks.
Yeah. So, again, this is why Jamie Dimon, and a lot of times on the show, you'll hear me say that he's more of a politician than people realize. He maneuvers so well in situations like that. It's disgusting. I would not maneuver that well personally if I were getting prodded quite the same way. And maybe he's just had decades of experience at it, but I mean, just so good. And I wanted to cover a little bit of his commentary on AI and how it now has a seat at the table and his approach on this. And again, this is a massive pivot from what we heard historically. And this is, of course, covered by Bitcoin News, which, again, Bitcoin News, Jamie Dimon's comments on AI and how it has a seat at the table. And then he talks about how it's just the tip of the iceberg and he relates it to the internet here. So you're seeing a heavy rhetoric change from people like Jamie Dimon in these sets of circumstances that I think are important and worthwhile to recognize as they come about.
Technology has always been the thing that changes everything we all do. That's been true my whole life, my whole career. So we've always had, the head of technology at the management table, and we do any kind of business review. What are you doing in tech? And it could be, for finance or HR. It says, what are you doing in tech? How are you going to improve your ops? What are you doing what's better, what other people do? AI, we took it out of tech. They worked close with tech, now has a seat at the table. And so whenever we meet, there's a list of AI. What are you doing in AI? So any one of you, if you worked at JP Morgan, you have your list of what are you doing in AI, what are you implementing? It could be coding, it could be open AI, it could be limited systems. We have 500 use cases, and you got to get better at it. It's very fast, it's changing rapidly. We have an LLM where 150,000 people use that internal data every week. And you just got to make it more to your psyche. And I still think it's the tip of the iceberg. I think this one is faster, is massive. It is like the internet or electricity. It's not going to roll over 20 years. It's more parabolic for now. And
when you
technology.
So I think there's 2 points that are really important here. Number one, he's talking about this being a parabolic, and he's technology run. He's using the internet as the nearest proxy, which is interesting. Not the tech boom, but the internet. And he's talking about this spike up. But we also heard recently, and I'm going to do this over his face because it seems appropriate, and because my second point is on this screen. He's talking about this parabolic increase like that, right? But of course, we just heard, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon on Joe Rogan talking about how it doesn't go like that anymore. Is you're seeing this kind of plateau here, which is the period that we would be in here, while you're seeing this infrastructural cost spike up for the power needs. So because of this problem, you're getting a bit of a dissension amongst the ranks. I don't know that someone like Jamie Dimon is probably as well abreast of AI as someone like Ben Affleck is. I said it, And this is the second part. Bitcoin news. Syed, if you're still watching, I know this emotionally causes you some consternation. I know you're probably very upset by the fact that this is on our show. And I just want you to know, suck it. Okay, moving on. There's more here to talk about. And I think that a lot of you waited for the housing and affordability stuff. I've only got a couple more before we get into the housing and affordability stuff. And I do have a lot to get into. And I know you're thinking, Chris, you're talking about everything but that. And the reason why is because there wasn't a whole lot that happened in Davos related to housing and affordability. It was kind of a big zero. And I'm trying to show that. And I think here's another one on AI too. It's 17 seconds. I'll skip that for now. I don't think there's a whole lot. But basically, Jamie Dimon says, don't put your head in the sand. It is what it is. Now, let's talk about institutional home buying. And there's a couple different things that I think we need to touch on because there's number one, what was announced. I think that's important. And number two, I think that you need to understand some of the moves that were made by institutional landlords, one in particular, Invitation Homes, heading into this. You may have heard us on previous shows talk about how the president was supported by the home builders. He's a real estate owner, and I thought it was strange, to say the least, that he was acting in such a way which could be counter to their interests. But as we've seen a bunch of this stuff happening, we've kind of seen a little bit of the air out of the balloon come out. Oh, this comment is totally worth sharing. Here you go. Why aren't you boys broadcasting from Davos? Come on, Chris, step it up. I felt we should be there, selfish as it may be. And then I saw, what's that guy? He's been all over the internet recently. I think he's a professor at Stanford or Harvard or something like that. Scott Galloway, I think his name is. He's at Davos, and he was on a panel. And this is in his story. You should go check it out. He was on a panel in Davos, and he was speaking, except Trump was speaking at the exact same time he was. And he turns the camera around, and he's on this panel, and he's got a moderator, and he's got somebody else on the stage with him. And there's like 5 people in the room, and he's laughing at himself, and it's a hilarious, look at what he's dealing with. And as much as he's a guy I want to listen to. You get the president of the United States in the room making comments on things like the geopolitics, Greenland and all this other stuff. So I don't think we would have had a big drop, but funny nonetheless. And I appreciate the comment. Let's get into. I'm going to share the screen here. I think this is a good one here. So build to rent is exempt from White House's order to ban institutional home buying. And if you recall from previous lives And I want to say episodes 317, 318 of the Higher Standard podcast. 318 came out just yesterday. We covered a little bit of the difference between institutional home buyers that build to rent and those who build to sell. We talked a lot. So there's a couple different categories we need to be aware of when it comes to institutional home builders and buyers, right? Number one, there are those who buy a lot of mortgages in the market or buy homes in the market. I look at that as kind of category one. Think Blackstone. They have been a net seller over the course of the last 10 years. They put out a statement to that effect. So this is not me having a bias. This is just, that's the rhetoric they've seemed to have proven out with their data. Then there is the entire other cohort, which is people who are home builders who build and then also build to rent, meaning they're not building those to sell to the public, they're building them to rent out to the public. That provides additional rental supply to the markets and helps keep rental rates down. So limiting their ability to build to rent or own homes would have been a problem for rental rates and would have driven rental rates up for society. So this exemption made sense on that front, and I think that was a very important thing. And then over the course, there's the third category of people who just build homes to sell. And they are going to build to sell, but if they get pinned down by having too much ownership while they're in the process of selling, they're not going to build at the cadence they once did because they don't want to be caught holding the bag, if you will, if they can't sell all these homes. So it almost tempers the growth on new home construction as a result of that third category. So build to rent is exempt from the White House's order to ban institutional home buying. Rental housing economist Jay Parsons, the order doesn't actually ban institutional buyers, presumably due to legal limits, but it does look to limit it through various means like blocking Fannie and Freddie loans. Okay, so it blocks Freddie and Fannie loans. There are plenty of lenders out there who will take up that pace. And as much as I love the GSEs and they buy them on the secondary market, Fannie and Freddie will buy those loans in the secondary market anyway. So what are you really doing? You're just creating more business growth for the middleman as opposed to direct to Fannie Freddie. So I don't know if there's a lot of teeth in that. And we heard all this rhetoric going into Davos is going to be a big thing, but it really wasn't. This is an article from Resi Club, and this is from Lance Lambert. You can catch him on X. I take a look at a lot of his stuff. He is a little bit aggressive in the home prices need to come down housing pundit camp, but so was I until I spent some time looking at it, so no shame on him there. The order then directs multiple federal agencies, including the Treasury Department, HUD, and the Department of Agriculture, the VA, GSA, and the Federal Housing Finance Agency to issue guidance within 60 days, limiting the federal government's role in facilitating institutional purchases of single-family homes that could otherwise be bought by owner-occupants. Okay, again, nothing super aggressive there. Then, within the 60 days, the government agencies and government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie, Mae, and Freddie Mac, won't be allowed to approve, insure, guarantee, or securitize single-family home purchases by large institutional investors. Okay, fine. What do they care? Again, let's read the rhetoric very carefully here. Won't be allowed to approve, insure, guarantee, or securitize single-family home purchases by large institutional investors. Large institutional investors don't need Freddie Frannie for this. They can go out and get other capital from the market. So I guess allocating Freddie Frannie GSE capital towards solely towards consumer home buyers, individual homeowners, great. That's what it's there for originally. So again, I'm not seeing a big meaningful change here. In other words, the order doesn't ban institutional home buying or force large landlords to sell off their existing portfolios, but instead seeks to restrict their access to federally backed financing and other forms of government support when acquiring single-family homes. There's a ton of liquidity in the system. People got money to deploy. I'm looking at this going like, and how is this supposed to change anything? I think all it is a headline. I did all these things to stop institutional investors, and I went to the extent of my power, and I did all that I could. Well, okay, maybe, yeah, sure. But, and again, there's a whole argument whether this is even legal anyway, and it's got to get past the House and the Senate and some of the changes. Now, as the head of the agencies, the president can and did do this, so this is something that he can do, I guess, in that space. The order does have an exemption, build to rent, and this is part of why I'm sharing this here, and that exemption, I know you guys can't see it, is in that box there. And maybe, just maybe, I can do a little fancy work here. I haven't tried this yet, but I have a way to highlight things with boxes like this, but I actually prefer to do it like this because I can do this, hit capture on my screen. I can then exit this, and I know I'm walking you through it like you guys can't see things on your own, and it's probably obnoxious, but I have a reason. There you go. Much bigger. Let's take a look here. The guidance issued pursuant to subsection AI or A1 of this section shall include appropriate narrowly tailored exceptions for build-to-rent properties that are planned, permitted, financed, and constructed as rental communities, and such other appropriate narrowly tailored exemptions as the applicable agency may determine appropriate to further the policies of my administration, wrote Trump's order signed on January 20th, 2025. So that's a pretty heavy exemption that I think is, kind of one of those things that is going to be used as a carve-out to allow people to do all the things you think they're not allowed to do anyway. And that makes sense. The home builders supported Trump. It was a big part of his presidential campaign, a big part of his presidential run. So why would that surprise anybody that he has some loyalty to that? And that's what we talked about on the show a little bit. The order doesn't actually ban institutional buyers, presumably due to legal limits, because again, the president has abilities as the head of agencies, but some of this stuff would have to go through the Senate and the House. And of course, there's the whole SEC issue there as well. But does look to limit it through various means like blocking Fannie and Freddie loans and also ordering the DOJ and the FTC to review substantial acquisitions and prioritize enforcement of the antitrust laws. Okay, well, you got Lennar, D.R. Horton, you got some of these home builders that are out there, and okay, they'll review them for antitrust. We're also reviewing Netflix. So what? This is part of the business, and nobody really owns that much of the market anyway because it's so fragmented across the country. Even the largest. That's why when we talk about institutional investors, one of the things we talk about is what size is institutional. Is it 1,000 units or more? Is it 100 units or more? And even if you go 1,000 units or more, it's like call it less than 3%. 100 units or more ownership is probably closer to 7%, depending on how you look at that as well. There's some caveats there. Again, not meaningful. Build-to-rent is carved out, but only if planned, permitted, financed, and constructed as rental communities, presumably meaning that build-to-rent communities as opposed to scattered site homes built by home builders in subdivisions. That is a very easy thing for a home builder to comply with, okay? So I don't want to be the bearer of bad news here, but if I have to comply with certain rules that say that I can only build to rent in communities, I'm just going to build communities. And then, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm going to sell some of these things in the future at some point in time. So unless there's some type of time burden or restraint or tax implications for doing it within a narrow window of time, this is meaningless. This means nothing to the American consumer. As a matter of fact, this is just a headline to post on X, in social media, in Truth Social, and everywhere else saying, I did this. And it addressed your concerns because you said you wanted to limit home buyers and home builders and institutional owners. And I did all these things to help you out. Well, did you really, though? Because from where I'm looking here, the carve-outs speak for themselves, or as they say in law, res ipsa loquitur. And yeah, if you don't know what that means, I don't either after all those years of law school. I think it speaks for itself in Latin. But let's go back to the screen share here. I think this is also good to share. Share of U.S. single-family homes purchased in a given quarter by large institutional investors, according to John Burns Real Estate and Consulting. You saw a spike up in this period here, which is, for those of you who can't see it, Q1 2020-2023. But you've seen it taper off a little bit down to Q1 2025, which is that line there. And if you go across the historical average here, and I'll clear this out and show you, boom, you're not super high up and you're not super down at the bottom, but at the same time, institutional capital poured into single-family acquisitions during the pandemic housing boom, driven by low interest rates, rapidly rising home prices, rents, and abundant liquidity in the capital markets. Let's take that step by step, okay? I think this is probably going to solve the problem on its own. So if you put out a headline like this and you're the White House and you know this is going to go the trajectory that you think that it's going to go, then guess what? You can say you solved the problem as opposed to the market solving it in itself, which is the whole point of capitalism. So number one, institutional capital poured into single-family acquisition during the pandemic housing boom. We can all safely assume that that is probably not going to happen again in the future now. So let's just take that off the table. Number two, driven by low interest rates. Yes, the White House wants lower interest rates, but do they want near zero interest rates? I haven't heard that much, at least yet anyway. And certainly with inflation possibly being the leverage point to tilt the spectrum of how far that should go, I don't think you're going to get down to pandemic era interest rates. I mean, you're talking 60% of the population has a mortgage, 40% owns their property free and clear. Of that 60% of that 60% has mortgage rates below 5%. And you have the 10-year going up today, which we're going to cover here at the end to wrap up, which means that interest rates on the 30-year mortgage are going up, not down. And even if they did come back down, they're still going to be above that 5%, and the locked-in effect is there, which is, as you know, the reason we put together the housing affordability chart, this one right there, to share with you in the first place. Again, The rate interest change could change things, but you're not going to get as low as you did. So you're going to be locked out. That's why that number is 13 and not 50 and not 60. There is a pretty significant pressure and constraint, a locked out constraint of the interest rate market. That should surprise no one who listens to the show. Getting back to this, you also have rapidly rising home prices. Okay, again, I don't know that we're going to see that. As a matter of fact, most people are calling for home prices to taper off. But if you look at home valuations, you've seen a little bit of that flatlining there. And in our home affordability chart, again, referencing it once again, this is Q2. So keep in mind, housing and prices are a lagging indicator. You got an average home price of $410,800 and an average rate of 6.77%. This is, again, as of Q2. Q3 will be updated here shortly. And when that happened, okay, that was actually coming down from the height of home prices. So I don't see that that's going to happen either. So again, abundant liquidity and capital in the markets, okay, that's there. But then again, we look back to our Fed liquidity chart here, and you look at this and say, okay, wait a minute, we are not flush with cash. We are not supportive or flooding the market with cash right now. We are risk kind of neutral, if you will. We're in this tense category here, which is why we come to those spectrums there. So there isn't as much liquidity as there once was in the market, certainly not with stimulus and consumer buying. So a lot of this is going to self-correct. And that is why whenever I clear this chart and go back to the share screen here, you see what's happening here. You see that this is getting back to normalized levels because you're seeing normalized financial activity. And as home prices continue to adjust and interest rates continue to go long, you're going to see a difference here. Now, by going long, someone's going to say, Chris, I don't know what you mean here. We'll get to that. Let's bear with me on one more article here. I want to talk about institutional home buyer invitation homes because they may have been tipped off, and may have been is kind of a funny word here. Understanding institutional landlord invitation homes new housing market bet. Okay. Point out this came out on January 20, 2026. All right. Invitation Homes makes a new build to rent bet. Well, that's convenient. One of the largest institutional landlords, which wholly owns 86,139 single-family rentals, announced Thursday that it will acquire ResiBuilt, a southeast-focused build-to-rent developer, for $89 million. Atlanta-based ResiBuilt has delivered more than 4,200 homes since its founding in 2018 and operates across Georgia, Florida, and the Carolinas. The transaction included 23 existing fee build contracts and a pipeline of additional third-party developments opportunities. Invitation Homes also secured options on approximately 1,500 lots. The development here isn't that Invitation Homes is adding new built homes to its portfolio. It has been executing bulk deals with home builders for years, but that it is now moving upstream by creating its own in-house home builder via its acquisition of ResiBuilt, a build-to-rent developer. This move strengthens Invitation Homes' competitive position in the high-growth build-to-rent and single-family rental markets while maintaining a capital-light model in this environment in which single-family is facing political headwinds. Expanding from their build-to-rent capabilities is an astute move. Yeah, it is. So there you go. You got people who are already playing into this. So for you thinking like, oh, Chris, they're going to have to build a loophole. No, they already knew how they were going to get around this. This was already there. So this whole institutional home buying was much ado about nothing. Okay. It didn't really have any impact whatsoever on the market. It's not going to have any impact whatsoever on the market. The home builders are going to continue to build. They're just going to build under a different lens or different title. And it's going to be business as usual for many of them. I have not seen anything other than trying to limit their financing and restrictions there as something that's sizable. And if you are a large institutional investor, you probably have more access to capital than I do. Okay? That's what that is. All right. So I've got a couple more videos. One more video, Scott Bessent. And I'm going to play this real quick. And I think this is going to be an interesting one. And this is not streaming. I downloaded this one in advance because every once in a while I do think about things intelligently, although not all the time, because why would I want to do that? This is Scott Bessent. This is a very, very, very short clip I'm going to play here. So let me switch to the screen view. You guys should be seeing him in a very interesting facial expression. Here we go. I'm going to adjust the audio as we play so not to blow your ears out.
I believe the markets are going down because the Japanese bond market had a 6 standard deviation move for the past 2 days. That would be in their 10-year bonds. I've been in touch with my economic counterparts in Japan and urged them to take the necessary measures to stabilize their bond market, but that's spilling all over into all bond markets. German yields are up, French yields are up, U.S. yields are up. Again, it's mostly the Japanese bond market, got nothing to do with Greenland.
All right, there you go. So I think that that's an interesting narrative to take yesterday. I think that's partially true, although not entirely true, but he is right about the bond markets largely being up. And we're going to spend some time on this because I think it's important to understand a little bit about the bond market. One of the most misunderstood things that we see on the show and people asking about, one of the best ways that you can look this up, and this is why I'm using their quote system and not ours, go to CNBC, go to the top here, click on bonds, and you can click on US 10-year right there. And this is going to show you the 10-year Treasury chart. We are down slightly today, but if we want to take a look at this and go one day here, you can see this is the intraday trading. Started off at around 4.27. So you've seen some small, slight drop off, but if you look at the 5-day chart here, this is really what they're talking about here. You saw the bonds sell off a little bit there yesterday, and then you saw bonds creep up over the course of the last couple of days. Year to date, you've seen this price spike. And I think that's what's driving the 10-year and some of the mortgage rates, which this is, again, your best proxy for mortgage rates up. So let's spend some thoughtful moments on exactly what this really means and what you should be thinking about here. And I've got a bit of a pre-prepared commentary on this because I know every once in a while, even I screw this up, but I think it's important. So the close was notable yesterday. I think it closed at about 4.3%, its highest level since August. It helps unpack why the 10-year moved there and what it actually signals. Let's kind of get into a little bit more detail. The 4.3% close is indeed the highest since August, and the driver isn't runaway inflation expectations, which I think a lot of people would have called had it have been a couple of months ago, right? Is inflation's running away, things are getting kind of crazy. The bulk of the move has come from a rising term premium, not break evens. Inflation expectations over the next 10 years remain anchored around 2.2 to 2.4%. And the statement there is that you're seeing predictions of inflation stay pretty stagnant in that space. And if you haven't seen people predicting inflation is going to go up, and you've got this turmoil at the FOMC with who's going to be the voting majority, whether it's going to be Trump's picks or the legacy people that are there, I don't know there's been a whole lot of change there. So yields have pushed higher as investors demand more compensation for duration risk. Let's break that down. What they're basically saying is, if I'm going to go out longer, and let's do this with charting here, right? If I'm going to go out longer, this being 1 year, this being 10 years, right? The duration of me going out longer term, more time of you holding my money for the bond is going to require a greater percentage return. That is supposed to be a percentage symbol, and it's a terrible looking one. A greater percentage return, because you are holding my money at a greater risk over time. Now, in some ways, that's healthy. If you're holding my money for 2 years, it's less risk to me than if you're holding it for 10 years, right? Something can go wrong in 10 years, just with, 5 times more time that's there. So that's what that is really about. Supply dynamics matter here. The U.S. Treasury is issuing heavily at the long end of the fund persistent deficits, to fund persistent deficits, I should say. So again, we have a national deficit, which is big. And how do you solve it? You sell bonds in part, and then you have things like tariffs and other things that are creeping in. But if you're selling a lot more 10-year bonds, you've got to pay a higher percentage. See, that looks more like a percentage sign. A higher percentage to draw more money into that bond versus this bond. So if this bond is paying 3.5%, right, and this bond is paying 3.7%, you as a consumer might say, well, why would I get an extra 0.2% for 10 years? You're going to say, no, I want this at 6%, and I'm using extreme numbers for example here, and then that's going to drive more money into the 10-year here, okay? And that's kind of the baseline of what you're seeing happen as more and more 10-year bonds are being issued at that higher price point. At the same time, the Fed is still allowing about $60 billion a month in treasuries to roll off its balance sheet, meaning that the private market has to absorb more duration, has to absorb more of that long-term hold. And what that is really referencing is exactly what I've showed you multiple times on this show, is this, right? So as the Fed allows $60 billion-ish a month in treasuries to roll off, the Fed balance sheet is changing. Now, it's not changing very aggressively, but that Fed balance sheet is flooding the markets with cash. That is quantitative easing. This is the QE side of things. This is the QT side of things. For those of you who want a visual representation of what those things look like, if you're flooding the market, hence the word here, flood, of $60 billion a month in treasuries, you're dumping that money into the market. Now, it's not making a meaningful impact to the ultimate liquidity in the markets right now, but it is certainly driven largely by a disproportionate amount of long-term duration bonds flooding the market. Hence the reason why, again, green flooding the market 80 to 100, and we're at 95. Those bonds flooding the market will drive the price up as they need to pay people more to buy them. So there is more duration risk as people buy them. They're buying for a longer period of time for longer, higher yielding bonds, thus that longer duration risk in the market. Historically, a 10-year in the 4.3 to 4.5% range tightens financial conditions, but that's not inherently destabilizing. The key question is persistence. If yields stay elevated because growth in real rates are firm, markets can adapt. If they rise further due to term premium stress alone, that's when risk assets start to feel pressure. In short, this is a supply and pricing demand issue. Not a sudden inflation risk that happened by Japan. Japan's just getting a worst hit of it because they got their own issues over there to deal with. And I generally don't talk about other countries' finances because I barely know ours. But one investor can't ignore what's happening here. The 10-year Treasury yield is based on supply and demand in the bond market. It's just the way it works, okay? So I appreciate you guys tuning into the show. Davos was a bit of a disappointment for me. I don't know if it was for you. I was hoping for a whole lot more in the way of sexy, sensational new ideas, but I don't blame anybody for there not being anything revolutionary because, frankly, if there were, you probably would have seen some really good suggestions on social media. We have a bit of a brain trust that's out there constantly thinking, and AI didn't solve the problem for us, so I guess Ben Affleck was right there. So thank you for tuning in. We will catch you next week. We are also recording next Tuesday's podcast tonight, episode 319. If you guys are catching this and you guys stayed on or you're seeing this afterward before, call it 6 p.m. Pacific time tonight, send us a message. I will include anything you say on the show, and we will include you in your comments and your thoughts on there. Some of this will be covered in different ways on that show. I'll also have a lot of media to share with Saeed on that as well. And there's currently certain things that are developing as Trump speaks on Iran right now, which my heart and soul goes out to people of that country. They are going through a whole lot, and I hope to hell that us showing support as a country is not something that we are doing as a people, as a populace, but not doing as a political, executive-driven stance. It'll be interesting to see what his comments are on the matter as it comes up, because there are a lot of people dying. Until next time. We would. Why would I want to do that? That's funny. Until next time, everybody. I appreciate you tuning in. We are still working on improving the live streams, but I do have one other thing to show you. I almost forgot. This bad boy. We built this, and yes, I'm off screens because I'm hideous. To show you the week ahead, and this is this week. Right now, we've already gotten some information, which we'll talk about a little bit tonight on the 30-year mortgage rate stuff. The important details are highlighted in black. You got pending home sales month over month. We have our previous stuff here with the P and the number. It shows you what our previous quarter was. Everything, again, highlighted in black is something that we feel is meaningful and important. You can see the President Trump speaking was also on this. But the biggest thing to take a look at here, not only is the inflation numbers coming out and S&P Global's got their flash, but this bad boy down there, FOMC rate decision, earmarked by the red, I probably should have made that bar black, is down there. These are the things for you to know and see up ahead in the future, in the week ahead. So if you're listening to this on the podcast in the future, I don't do as good of a job articulating this calendar snapshot, but it is something to be worthy, to noteworthy and to watch for. And for those of you who nerd out on the show's data like we do, you have it like we do. Until next time, everybody, thanks for tuning in. We will catch you on the next one. Okay. Bye.